is about basically how we can work together on this vexing problem that so many of our veterans and our service members live with, and we don't have good answers for them. So just pointing out the obvious context, but restating it, we've made important strides working together in managing acute TBI injuries. Right now, the classification of TBI is really not very impressive, right? It's mild, moderate, severe based on level of consciousness, nothing to do with the path that got you there or what might get you out of your symptomatology. The treatment of the chronic effects of TBI focuses on symptom management, and it's hard to tell people what's going to happen to them in the future. So I absolutely love the way that Cohen Veterans Bioscience goes about doing things, because they do the hard work of synthesizing what we know and bringing together the very best people in the field to identify the knowledge gaps. And so my major question here is to ask us, how are we going to organize ourselves to address these gaps efficiently? So resources are substantial, but not unlimited. As you may have covered earlier, it's about $345 million for DoD, NIDLR, NIH, and VA. This doesn't count spending in other agencies for TBI research. So that's a substantial amount of money, and I think the refrain that I hear a lot at meetings is we need more money. And the first thing I think we need to do is use the money we have wisely. And so I want to talk a little bit about how I think we should do that. So we have our organizational friends and foes. The friends are in regular script, and the foes are in italics. So transparency is key. We need to know what each of us is doing and what our roles are, and we need not to be just informed by the latest article in the New England Journal of Medicine. We need to know what's going on as we're planning the activities, as we're executing these activities, because the whole field can shift based on one person's discoveries, and it should shift in real time. We should not do siloed work in which underpowered studies, in which studies that have such a small sample size from a selected group are not representative of the entire population that we're trying to look at in that study with TBI. And redundancy are the norm. And I want to clarify the difference between redundancy and intentional validation. Redundancy means that, you've kind of studied the same thing, you can't really compare them, but, the sum is not, it's not greater than the sum of its parts. The whole is not greater than the sum of its parts. Whereas validation, and we're woefully lacking validation, is intentionally conducting studies to affirm something as truth. We need to ensure that the results of all of the well-conducted studies are available and readily discoverable. And mostly, I'm talking to the lady in the mirror here, because VA struggles with making data available for a number of reasons, regulatory-wise and also just in terms of information technology. So that's something that we are committing to doing better. And together, I think what would be helpful is to identify key data sets that we should be making available that we are not already, and moving ahead in this way. Of course, this community has been groundbreaking in terms of urging VA to share data, and I want to commend Dave Sifu and Stu Hoffman and all of the others working on Sensi for making those data available. That's exactly what we need to be doing for every study. Another thing that gets under my skin is not sharing negative results of well-conducted studies. We need to create forums, whether it's simply posting them on the web, of saying, hey, this was a well-conducted study and it came up with a negative result. That is so important. We need to reward people for doing so, and I say that as a funder. We need to not just reward the fancy articles showing a positive result that may or may not be validated later, but also the negative articles and the validations. We need to set objectives, and I think this is what really this community is about, setting our objectives, the gaps, and we need to just absolutely be relentless in coordinating our work to accomplish them. And I've run a couple of coordinating centers before, so I'm passionate about it. And there's no other way but meeting together regularly, sharing information. An app is not going to solve the problem for you. We need to get together and work together and create the structures to do this. And the counterpart to that is assuming that the work that's needed will just happen automatically. Last night, in my position, believe me, I'm always the dumbest person in the room, in part because I go to different meetings. Today it's TBI. Tomorrow, it might be limb loss. And so last night I went into PubMed, one of the great inventions of National Library of Medicine, and looked up TBI. Wonderful, amazing things, but all over the place. I've described before that it's like if you wanted to get a rocket ship to go to Mars and you just say, everybody work on getting to Mars. And, somebody might say, I've got the greatest navigational system, and I've got this and I've got that, but nobody's figured out, how they'll go to the bathroom or something. That would be a critical piece missing, and only through coordination can we solve that problem. And I think what we need to do as organizations and people is recognize our strengths and our weaknesses. So VA is great at doing certain things. We are not great at doing other things. And so what I would like to do is to have us be part of an ecosystem where we can do what we do best and allow others to focus their energies on other things. And the counterpart to that is spreading ourselves too thin. So one way we measure our commitment to a particular area is we fund X number of projects in that area. Well, that doesn't really reflect what contributions we're making. I think we need to be focused instead on the actual outputs of our work rather than how many things we funded. So our strategic priorities and how we might be useful. So we have 3 strategic priorities that I came up with in the shower one day 2 years ago, and I still like them. So that was a great shower. So the first is to increase veterans' access to high-quality trials, and I know there's a discussion about trials here. So we conduct long studies, big studies. We're conducting a study of FIT versus colonoscopy for screening for colon cancer, 50,000 people over 10 years. VA can do big studies. So we could be very useful as a clinical trials partner. I want to skip to the last one because I'm going to focus on the middle one, putting VA data to work for veterans. We could be useful in better understanding the nosology of TBI as represented in the electronic health record, in the Million Veteran Program data, in Sensi, TRACS, and maybe some other data sets that I don't even know they exist. But I think we have some strengths in that area. Where we don't have strengths right now is we don't have a lot of data scientists in the VA. So it'd be great if we could partner on that to shore up where we don't have strengths. So then I want to focus on the middle priority, which is increasing the substantial real-world impact of VA research. And so I have a proposal that I'd like your thoughts on at the end of this meeting. So I propose that we just divvy up what needs to be done. And at the end, I'm going to ask you to give your thoughts on how we can improve this idea. So sit there thinking, yeah, okay, do I like this idea of Rachel's? And if so, how could I make it even better? So to get this conversation started, I'm making the commitment here that VA research will step forward to support the coordination of the effort to fill preclinical knowledge gaps. So we will, and what form that will take, is that a contract? Is that an award that will go out? TBD, but we will support this coordination. So many times I have seen when I've gone to these wonderful NRAC meetings where DoD, VA, and NIH get together to talk about our highest priorities, that we keep saying, oh, we need coordination, and then we say, but we're all so busy. But we can use some of our traditional mechanisms to foster that coordination, and that's what I'd like to do. So why do I think that we want to support the preclinical work? So we've made a substantial investment in this area, and we'd like to be sure that what we're doing in this area and what others are doing in this area leads to real-world impact, leads to better treatments as quickly as possible. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about our relatively new open field blast core. Of course, some of the folks from Cohen Veterans Bioscience went down. Thank you so much for traveling to beautiful Columbia, Missouri to see the core. We're investing $4.1 million into this effort. It's located outside Columbia, Missouri. We have the leader of this effort here, Dr. Gu. And it's the only open field blast facility to follow the chronic effects of blast injury. We're also going to do some comparisons, right? Because, there are lots of different models, as I learned, of TBI in the preclinical space. So we're going to look at the effects of explosive-induced blast versus blast tube or the closed head injury models in detail. And in our long term, we want this to serve as a core, not only for VA, but for others. So I'm told that I need to ask for the video now to show off the blast core. There goes the blast, the flashing of the light. Here's the primary blast wave. And then that, as I understand it coming afterwards, is the ground bounce, which you don't see in the non-open settings. So this was shared by Dr. Gu. It's 15,000 frames per second. And you can just see visually, I mean, like I said, I'm not an expert in these areas, but you can see that this is a substantially different type of injury. And already Dr. Gu and his team have presented results demonstrating how this injury differs from other types of injuries. So even if you don't see any physical head movement in the blast, there's still injury. So I'm going to brag about the Truman VA. When Alex Chu, who's over there, initially told me, you got to go down to Columbia, Missouri, I said, what the heck do I want to go to Columbia, Missouri? Now I'm telling everybody, as Magali can attest, that everybody needs to be going down to Columbia, Missouri. So in addition to this blast core, they also have a truly world-class preclinical bioimaging center. It's amazing. They have these little teeny PET scanners. They have 70 MRIs, ultrasounds, in vivo retinal imaging. It's just an amazing core that they have. And this core has been used for drug development. So they know how to keep things moving along in a valid, reproducible way. So they also have a neurobehavioral and cognitive function core for preclinical space, and they have access. University of Missouri has a very large electron microscopy core. So it really is incredible. I'd also like to point out that the University of Missouri there has a veterinary school. So already the team is envisioning moving on to larger animal models, which we know is an essential step as you move towards treatment. So here is what we're planning on doing. So we want to look at mice with different genetic backgrounds, and they'll be exposed to open field blast. They'll have the cognitive and functional testing. We'll do all the fun imaging on them, and then there'll be the neuropathology. And again, we'll be comparing open field blast to other types of injury used in the preclinical setting, so we can begin to understand the differences there and understand how this might affect our approach to treatment. I just got to also say why Columbia is cool, because they also have a nuclear reactor there. So I got to get to see it. Thank you, Alex. It was established in 1966. And it's amazing. They are the sole domestic supplier for a couple of isotopes used all the time. in clinic, and they help to bring a number of radiopharmaceuticals to market, including Ceratec, which is used to look at cerebral perfusion. They're amazing. They're also wonderful collaborators. So, if there are people in this room who say, wow, I'd like to collaborate on something like this, the people at the reactor were saying, come on down. We're very happy to do collaborations. So, with that background, I'd like to get your thoughts on, as I said, what do you think of us coordinating the preclinical work? Do you think this is a good way of going about doing things? How can we improve upon this idea? And I'd also like to know whether there are other groups who might consider supporting the coordination of other priority areas, like biotypes and phenotypes, et cetera. And before shutting up to hear what you have to say, I have to thank my colleagues. I especially want to thank somebody who can't be here, but who's been very actively involved by email and phone and in all these other ways. Ralph De Palma, he's photographed there, and it really is his vision that brought this open field blast core to life. And he continues to be a vital intellectual force in this effort. I also want to thank my colleagues, Alex Chu, Amanda Hunt, Stuart Hoffman, and then from Columbia, Dr. Gu, and then the administrative officer, Robert Crawford, from the Truman VA down there for all of the work they've put into making this happen. And then there is my contact information. The second email is my admin, so if you actually want to talk to me, email her because I'm a bad pen pal. So who has some thoughts on whether this is a good way to organize ourselves? I know there's a whole group working on the preclinical side. We'll call on people. Hi.
Thank you, Rachel. So we spoke in our subtype phenotyping group a lot about working groups too. So I think we would be happy to coordinate the biotype group. So when I say we, I'm talking about CVB, because you spoke about a gap in data science, and I think this is a big theme across the biotyping of legacy data sets, and I think that's something we could work closely with and help bring the right folks together.
And you're a data scientist.
I am.
Hooray! Yes, and what I mean by we'll support the coordinating is that we will fund. I'm imagining that it will be, probably $500,000 a year around that type of funding to support a coordinating center, doing all the meetings, making sure we have governance, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's a small investment compared to the $345 million being spent yearly on this work. So thank you. All right, so we got a taker for the phenotype biotypes. Yeah.
Hi, Rachel.
Hey.
I know you.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the blast models a little bit and how they would fit in. And for the non-blast, just conventional kind of injury, the idea was to calibrate the models with the human condition with various non-invasive measures and also neuropathology. The trouble with the blast models is that we do not currently have human neuropathology despite a lot of efforts and huge funding by the DoD. And so I wonder if there's a way there could be a getting together of minds of how would we get to see what primary blast neuropathology is in humans so that it would better help us refine the animal models.
I think that's a very reasonable approach. And just to be clear, the coordination of the preclinical models is not a sole focus on blast models, but it's a more holistic focus on, for instance, the gaps identified here and how do we fill them. But I think that's a very reasonable thing to consider, and perhaps something we could do in collaboration with DoD.
You mentioned that lack of data. I think I do recall Jeff Lang and others mentioning that DARPA had done a number of studies on the front line to try to measure the effects of blast injury directly and do some deep phenotyping. And I don't know whatever happened to that data and whether that is available. So it might be something we track down. Ina has...
I know there were some studies, right, where they actually had scanners, they had put them in the field. Yeah, in Afghanistan, I recall.
Right, and there's a
Maybe-
repository
maybe-
that
so
Dr.
I'm
Pearl is
not
putting together.
officially kind of represented them, but I do invited by Water investigator to went to Fort Leonard Wood Army Base in Missouri. Actually, it's only 30 minutes from our blast site. So in their breacher trainings, they did put certain monitor system over time. They collected blood before explosion and after explosion, and then they do the psychological testing. And over time, although this is a small scale, but they're continue working on that.
Oh, the repository from Dr. Pearl is on veterans' brain donation. So they're actually looking for ways to analyze it. So they're just launching it, and they have already several brains.
So the coordination center already has its job cut out to coordinate.
So I know this has been going on for a number of years. I'm not sure any of those brains would be considered primary blast.
Right.
That's a
Yeah.
That's a question.
And they're in the chronic state, and they're probably not primary blast. And the neuropathologies don't look different than what we see in conventional injury. So I think a lot of work needs to be done, and that's really going to be important for modeling.
But that's an interesting question. There are a number of brain banks that have been established now for both PTSD, and I don't know if there's one for TBI as well. And does anyone have an inventory of what kinds of injuries are represented there?
Well, those could be important for the sort of nosology component, also to perhaps image, distinguishing subtypes of the images and correlating them to clinical findings. Yeah, hi.
Hi, this is Tim Van Meter. So when I was at VCU School of Medicine in the neurosurgery department, we had a brain bank there that I helped maintain for a number of years. And I think like a lot of other centers, there's probably samples that are languishing in the freezers or liquid nitrogen somewhere that are not being utilized. And it's
There's
another one of
lonely
these
brains
coordinating
there.
projects. But, I mean, for our example, we were doing mostly neuro-oncology studies, but at the same time, we collected pretty much anything that was excised from the brain. So some of that was cortical contusion, there were TBI samples, some of them had serum. So it's kind of an immense undertaking probably to figure out what's out there. But certainly there are the resources to start to look at some of these things, especially the samples that have been snap frozen within 5 minutes of excision of surgery and this sort of thing that was done routinely because of the advent of genomics. And you wanted to get RNA that was of certain quality and so forth. So I think that's definitely something worth pursuing for the neuropathology.
I'm wondering, is there anyone here from the, Patrick Balgowan had mentioned the preclinical study program, who's on that team? Well, you are, yeah. So how would you imagine coordinating those activities and the plan there with something like this?
So the goal was to have the ability to coordinate and calibrate the same type of outcome measures preclinically and clinically. And so that you can determine that at least these features preclinically appear to be relevant to the studies that are going on, so that we aren't just willy-nilly using any model and calling it mild when it has a huge contusion or something. But that the challenge, as we did discuss, is the blast, where we don't have those endpoints. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be neuropathology. It could be we're actually collecting blood from people training with Carl Gustav. So we might have other measures that we can calibrate with, but ideally, you would have the neuropathology.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else want to comment on I think the call to action, the challenge that Rachel has put before us? Anybody else want to sort of say yes, put a stake in the ground? There's.
Hi, I'm JB Phillips. I work with Stu and Amanda on neurotrauma, at least in the brain, and we do at MRDC, we do have the executive agent for BLAST out of 2017 NDAA. And I can put you in, maybe Stu or you in contact with Mike Legere. They have weekly calls. But we don't have, when you say human pathology for BLAST, we don't have a lot of instant death from BLAST. You got complications following it. So we don't collect and secure a brain right after BLAST. So and usually BLAST has very polytrauma with it too. So it's complicated a little bit, and a lot of animal models don't have hemorrhage and other things with the BLAST. So it's a little complicated, but I think if I can talk with Stu and he can link us up to the BLAST folks down there and get Mike Legere. He's probably aware of this in Columbus, Missouri, but I haven't talked to him about it. And maybe we can work it from that way.
And there may be other kinds of data that you can think about, right? So what does this individual look like living with this condition, and are there abnormalities that can be measured quantitatively? Are there imaging scans on these individuals? Are there sleep-wakes data on these individuals, cognitive measures, things that can translate?
Yeah, there are, I believe, that they've tried to separate the BLAST from other injuries.
JB was thinking just what I was sort of starting on in response to Doug's comments. Yes, you don't get many people dying from mild brain injury to get the pathology to study. But now we have imaging, and what Columbia has is imaging. And you'll be able to maybe, with the breachers there, if you get them in to get imaged in Missouri, and see what their pictures, what their brains look like under different imaging modalities, you might be able to find something similar with the mice. And from what I understand, the blast pressures that you're working with on the mice is somewhere around the same blast levels as the breachers, and what would be with a Carl Gustav and other low-level blasts. Is that correct?
Yeah, maybe I can just kind of update it, unofficial. So, in the Missouri, actually, Douglas mentioned about in the Missouri Fort Leonard, they have acute consortium centers. They just got a DOD-approved a couple of projects. One of this imaging was awarded to Mizzou Radiology. So they're kind of starting gear up. So to do the imaging work after the breachers training course.
Great.
And they also collect the blood samples. That's ongoing.
And hi, Rachel.
Hey.
So we've got, through VA, through Sensi, through a whole number of different areas, we've looked at chronic effects in a lot of different paradigms of mild head injury. One of the things we would love to do is get them into an imager, Dr. Gu. So maybe we can organize some way that we could get our mice up to you and look at some of those really chronic effects on imaging outcomes in the mice.
Yeah, because there is the imaging core is run by a Dr. Hoffman, and that is also available as a core service. Yeah.
And I'm wondering, so there'll be recommendations that are coming out of the preclinical group effort and the SPC efforts, and those recommendations certainly could be shared with Rachel and this new core, and hopefully maybe even there's an opportunity to delve down a little bit more deeply into specific goals that we need to achieve. So what I heard loud and clear earlier today from General Xenakis is, are we holding ourselves to account to deliver against some milestones? We need this. When are we going to get there? How are we going to get there? What's the path to get there? And when we have, check off that box and move on to the next thing. So maybe there's a way that we can take the recommendations that you all have generated to say, this is where we want to be in this time period, and then come back and check off that box in a year or two.
So one more comment with the support from VA, Dr. Chus and Ramoni. So we starting to set up the behavior core will throughput automatic, less personal involvement. That's a behavior core could be as a phenotypic outcome to demonstrate for the preclinical study.
Yeah. So what will the timeline be for the findings of this group in terms of gaps to be generated?
So I believe that, so over the last 2 days, the teams have met to review the draft document that we brought into the meeting. Currently, it's about an 80-page document that everybody read before we got here. And so we've identified additional gaps in the evidence and knowledge, and then of course we want to synthesize the recommendations. I believe there are going to be 1 or 2 more sort of working group meetings, right, to pull those together, and then the final writing project. We have a number of medical writers here with us who are capturing every word that's being said, so that we can do that very quickly. I believe, my guess is it's going to be another 2 months before the final recommendations, the whole document is completed.
Probably completed in interim before that.
Right, we'll have a first draft. We'll certainly share the draft with you, but the final recommendations ready for submission, you guys are targeting in about 2 months, right?
Yeah, for me, what will be really important, my plea to these groups is be very specific. Don't say, like, more needs to be known about blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, I could have figured that out myself. Be specific about, we need a model for this.
Yeah, one more comment that during the 2 days discussion about the scaling issues from mouse to larger animal to human, the translational, the clinical relevant. Actually, in Missouri, beside Dr. Ramoni's mentioned all these resources, University of Missouri also have a national swan center. So we have a rare kind of mini pig and the fluorescence pig. So we have quite a lot of resource to do the larger animal study. And also we have, like mentioned about the vet school, we have a patient's dog as our patients. So quite a significant resource at Missouri.
Yeah, so yes, they do also have the swine part, which is fascinating. Yeah, they told me they also have glow-in-the-dark ones there. I didn't get to see those.
That would be fun. So any more comments or questions for Dr. Ramoni? No, we've had a long meeting, and I just want to make sure we're good. Well, thank you very much for joining us. So I think she just said the most important thing we need to all walk away from here with, which is this isn't the end of the story. We didn't convene everybody so that then we can all just go back to our day jobs and do what we've been doing. And we want to continue the dialogue. We want to continue the effort, continue to convene the working groups. And the most important thing is that we have to get much more specific about what the ask is. If we go to funders, and they can be a variety of funders. There are foundations who participated in this meeting with us who fund research. There are the various agencies here who fund research, and they want to know which research and why is that the priority now. Not just, we need more biomarkers and we need more animal models. Which ones, when, how? And that's the level of detail we want to get to in this report. So please go back and start taking, putting down your thoughts in your notes while they're fresh in your head, and let's send them all in to the team. We'll synthesize it, and of course, the report will go back out to you so that you can review it and confirm that, yes, this is where you want us as a field to go from here. And then we'll reconvene next year and check where we are again after a year's worth of effort. So thank you all for just a profound level of engagement and energy. I've never seen anything like it, frankly. I was astounded. I really appreciate it, and very much wish you all the best in your journeys home. Thank you.